Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Princeton Review's webinar, Why the PSAT Sort of Matters. We are very excited to have you join us this evening. Before I introduce our presenter for this session, I did want to just go over two quick housekeeping items, which will or should help you during the webinar this evening. First, for all of those of you that are joining us on the line, your lines are muted and will be muted for the entire webinar. So if you do have a question or something that you'd like to share with us, or a response to something that we might be asking you during the session this evening, please go ahead and use the question chat box that you'll see right on your GoToWebinar control panel. The second item that I wanted to remind you of for this evening is that this session is being recorded, and everyone will receive a copy of this recording about 24 to 48 hours after tonight's session. So in the next day or two, you will be receiving a follow-up email from the Princeton Review, which will include the link to where this recording will live, and you'll be able to access that whenever and however many times you want to make sure you've captured all of the information that you need to make sure that you have all of your questions answered. So without further ado, I am actually going to then take a quick second to introduce you to our presenter for this evening. His name is James Murphy, and he is actually our Director of Outreach, but also happens to be a premier tutor with the Princeton Review for many, many, many years. And so I am very excited to have him join us this evening. Welcome, James. How are you today?
I am good. Thank you, Anna. I hope everybody out there is also doing well. It's helpful for me to know who is out there. So if you guys want to start using that chat box and give me a sense of who you are, and probably the easiest way to do this is if you're a student, you can just simply type what grade you're in. So just 9 if you're in 9th grade, 10 if you're in 10th grade, 11 if you're a junior. If you're not a student, just a quick one-word answer, parent or counselor. Some simple, quick description would be very much appreciated. We're here to talk tonight about why the PSAT sort of matters, and that sort of is there on purpose because for most people it's not going to be nearly as important as the SAT. We'll talk about who it could end up being quite important for a little bit later in the session. So let's go ahead and get started. I can tell you a little bit about myself first. Anna already mentioned to you, I'm the Director of National Outreach for the Princeton Review. Kind of a communications role. I go out and do presentations like this a lot. I talk to reporters. I sometimes write about the SAT. I deal with a lot of high school counselors. But I've also been a teacher for the Princeton Review for a little bit over 20 years at this point, which means I've been teaching the people to do the PSAT and do the SAT and ACT longer than my students have been alive, which is something. I'm the guy on the left in that picture, if you're wondering, just in case. So if we're going to talk tonight about a couple things when it comes to the PSAT. We're going to begin with a simple just kind of question, all right, what is the PSAT? Then we'll move on to what can the PSAT do for you, and then finally we'll talk a bit about how you can raise your score on the PSAT. The test is obviously just a couple weeks away, so there's not a ton you're going to be able to do as far as if you haven't done anything already that you can do to get that score up a lot, but just some kind of quick tips that may help you get a few more points. The text box is, again, there for you to use. Feel free to type a question in at any point. I'm very happy to stop and answer questions as we go, but we'll also have some time at the end for any questions that you might have as well. We'll have a Q&A session at the end. So with no further ado, then let's move on to the question of what is the PSAT. Let's begin with some logistics. So it's a test like the SAT. It's a standardized test. It's created by the College Board. They're the same people who write the SAT. Couple things that make the PSAT different. One is that the PSAT is taken in school. Well, you might say, well, wait, no, don't you take the SAT at school as well? You do, but the thing with the PSAT is that for almost everybody, you're going to be taking it in your school, right? So it's administered by your own high school and you take it there. Some schools will pay for students to take it. So for some students, the test is going to be free. Some schools do charge students, and that fee can range from anywhere from just a couple bucks to up to as much as like $30, depending on how the school has decided to run the PSAT. Your school signs you up for the test. You don't sign yourself up for the PSAT, you do for the SAT. Having said that, though, you can and should create a College Board account before you take the test. And the reason to do that is the way you're going to get your scores back is most quickly. The quickest way you're going to get the scores back is through your College Board account, right? If you don't have a College Board account, you'll have to go in and create one, and then you link it, and they find you and link you to your high school, and then you'll be able to get it. But if you've got your account set up already, then you'll be able to get those scores back quickly. Looking at the test dates for a second, the test is offered, like I said, in school, either on Wednesday, October 11th, or Saturday, October 14th. If for some reason you're ill or a natural disaster occurs, like a hurricane or something like that, the test can be rescheduled, but only to the one date, which is October 25th. And then you sit and wait almost 2 months to get your scores back. So the test goes, you take the test in mid-October, and then you have to wait until the first week of December to actually get those scores back. So the advice I always give students is you take the test and then you just kind of forget about it. You won't see the scores until December. The reason it takes so long is because they have to check everything out and make sure everything is absolutely ship-shape and perfect because of the National Merit Scholarship Competition, which we'll be getting into a little bit later. Okay. Again, inviting anybody to type a question if you have any. Okay. 1 second, I just want to see if we can get, okay. If you can see a question up here already, that if you're a homeschooler, how do you take the test? So the option if you're homeschooled is you should call College Board. They'll tell you what the nearest high school is to you that is administering the test. You'll then want to get in touch with that school and let them know that you're interested in taking the PSAT there. If they have space and can accommodate you, they'll do that. Okay. Let's see what else we've got here for a second. Okay, so one question I can see that's come up is it common to take the PSAT twice? The PSAT is only offered the one time a year to people, either, again, October 11th on the Wednesday or Saturday, October 14th. Some schools offer it to sophomores. Increasing number of schools offer it to sophomores. You can take it sophomore year. Sophomore year PSAT does not make you eligible for any scholarship. It's a truly just a practice run, and then you can take it again junior year, but you can't repeat it in junior year. The PSAT can be taken abroad. Again, you have to find a school that's offering it. It tends to be American schools that are doing this. So chances are, if you're in an American school, you can talk to your school counselor there and talk to them about taking it. Otherwise, you're going to need to find a school around you. I would, again, contact College Board College Board to find out where the nearest site is. Let's go on a little bit further and dig into the test itself. So now we can start looking at the actual PSAT. Quick point to make here is that the test is basically identical to the SAT. The order is the same. You're going to have a reading section first, then you have the writing and language section. After that comes the math section, where where you can't use a calculator in the math section with a calculator. I'll say a little bit more about each of those sections in a second. The differences between the PSAT and the SAT, the first difference that you might see if you're looking at this is that it's a little bit shorter. It's 15 minutes shorter, it's 5 minutes less of reading, it's going to be 10 minutes less of the long math sections of the fourth section. There's no essay on the PSAT. You don't have to worry about the essay at all on the PSAT. Talking a little bit about the content on the test. The reading is reading comprehension like on every standardized test you've ever seen, all right? You'll read a passage and there are questions after it. Writing and language is mostly grammar. It's about 2/3 grammar and about 1/3 kind of style questions, asking you sort of questions like, what's the best word to put in the sentence here, or where should this sentence go, or what's a sentence that could be added to the passage. You're kind of thinking of yourself more as like an editor of the passage rather than a proofreader. The math and no calculator, the math with calculator. So SAT math and PSAT math are very, very heavily focused on algebra, not so much on geometry. There is geometry on the test. You're going to see something in the neighborhood of about 3 kind of traditional plain geometry questions, about triangles, circles, that sort of idea. You'll see coordinate geometry, but it tends to be tied more to testing you on questions about functions and about quadratic equations. And the single simplest piece of advice I can give to people on the math as far as studying content goes is quadratic equations are very big on the PSAT and on the SAT. So you want to be very comfortable working with the quadratic equations. You want to know the quadratic formula. You want to know how to factor a quadratic equation. You want to know how to multiply them. And you want to be very comfortable essentially connecting a quadratic equation to a parabola. If everything I just said is just sort of, I have no idea what you're talking about, then all right, you're going to be focusing some attention in the next couple of weeks to really boning up on quadratic equations. Moving on a little bit to talk some more. Actually, a question just came up. Is it based on Algebra 1 or 2 or both? It's both. It probably leans. The trick here is, of course, that Algebra 1, Algebra 2 they change a little bit from high school to high school. What gets included as Algebra 2. There is a little bit of trig on the test. You do get Algebra 2 in the sense that you're working with something when you're essentially connecting algebra to coordinate geometry, which tends to be a larger focus in algebra 2. There's no pre-calculus on the test, and there's no calculus whatsoever, okay? The scoring scale is the next thing to actually talk about with the PSAT. So let's move into that difference here. So the PSAT is scored strangely from 160 to 760 per section, right? So the SAT, people know that is typically scored, that it is scored from 200 to 800 on the math, 200 to 800 on the evidence-based reading and writing section. The PSAT is scored from 160 to 760, in part, I think, basically because College Board wants to distinguish it from the SAT. But their argument is also that because the test is shorter, it doesn't get to test as many difficult concepts, and therefore they essentially pull the scale down. Now, the idea here is not, right, and this is really important, it's not that you take a look at your PSAT score and say, oh, I can add 40 points to it, and that's what I'll get on the SAT. The way that the test is designed is essentially that if you go in and you take the PSAT, and let's say you score a 600 on the reading section, the reading and writing section, College Board's claim is that if you had taken an SAT that day, you would have scored a 600 on the SAT that day, okay? What this, of course, means is that if you're at the very top of the scale, you can't get anything over a 760. So if you got everything right on the PSAT, well, if you got everything right on the SAT, you get an 800, okay? Couple more things about the breakdown of the score, and we'll definitely get into talking about national merit and what qualifies you for national merit in a little bit. The PSAT math test is scored from 8 to 38. The SAT math test is scored from 10 to 40. So what's that math test number? That's a number that they apply to the math section. How do they go from that number to the 800 on the SAT? You take your number and you double it and add a 0. So let's say your math test score was a 30, you double it and get 60, add a 0, your SAT math section score would be a 600. Kind of silly that they even bother with that. It is relevant though when you're looking at the reading and writing section, all right? So with the reading and writing, they're again scored from 10 to 40 on the SAT or 8 to 38 on the PSAT. The way you approach, the way they come up with your total score, your total evidence-based reading and writing scores, they'll take each of those numbers, add them together, and you'll get something in the 160 to 760 range, or the, sorry, 16 to 76 range, and you add a 0 to it to get the total score. The reason I'm emphasizing this, the reason this is important is because when you get your PSAT results back, or if you take a practice PSAT, you want to look not just at your overall 160 to 760 score on the evidence-based reading and writing, you want to look at your reading test score and your writing test score to see if one of them is much better or worse than the other one. And if something's really weak, then you know that that's the area that you've got to focus on. Question about where does this 8 to 38 or 10 to 40 come from? Roughly, very roughly speaking, essentially every 1 or 2 questions you get wrong, you're going to lose a point on that scale. And that translates into the 160 to 760 or the 200 to 800 scale in the sense of that if you get, for every 1 or 2 questions you get wrong, you're typically losing about 10 points. Okay? The National Merit Scholarship Index is the number down at the bottom. We're going to talk a little bit later about how they come up with that number. It's just another complicated calculation, which, you know, they could have made much more simple, but they didn't. We'll talk about how they come up with that number in just a little bit. Let me just take a quick look back and see if there's any other questions. They're outstanding. Yeah. No. So. All right. You're going to get more scores, though, than just those ones we talked about. You can see right here, this is an SAT score report, which is why you see essay scores off to the side. This is the sample one that College Board provides, so we're not looking at anybody's score. You'll see the section scores, the 490 and 520. That section score comes from adding those test scores together, 26 and 23, and adding a 0. Underneath is where you'll see cross-test scores. Analysis in history, social studies, and analysis in science. And then underneath that, you'll see sub-scores. Schools don't care about cross-test scores or sub-scores, and I would actually encourage you not to care about them either, all right? These are pieces of information that when I say schools, I mean colleges, that a high school might look at these numbers to get a sense overall of how their students are doing in algebra or in vocab kind of work, which is the words in context. But they're not, but colleges aren't looking carefully at these scores. You shouldn't bother looking carefully at these scores either. Good question about how the scoring works with answering questions, right? When you get a question right, you get 1 raw point. When you get it wrong, you get no raw points. You get 0. If you leave it blank, you get 0. So what's the lesson there? Don't leave anything blank. Nothing should be left blank on the PSAT. If you have a hard time finishing a section, pick a single letter and fill in the rest of the bubbles with that letter. If you have to skip a question because you're not sure how to do it, fill in the bubble and then go to the next question. All right. So you make sure that you don't want to leave that. That you don't leave anything blank. Another question that just came up was: are there any schools that accept the PSAT in place of the SAT? Absolutely not. So the PSAT cannot be used to get into college. We're going to talk in a little bit about some of the things that it can be used for, but it is not used by any school to get you into college. It's not considered in the admissions process at all. Question just came up. Nobody ever believes this. So not even Ivy League universities look at cross-test scores or sub-scores. Not any university does. So I've been in a couple events sponsored by College Board where it's been mostly people are in college admissions offices, and they always ask, hey, what are you guys doing with the cross-test scores and what are you doing with the sub-scores? And the answer is always just silence and blank stares. Nobody's doing anything with these scores at all. All right, let's push on a little bit further and talk about now about what the PSAT can actually do for you. So what is this thing good for? I think for most people, the primary use of the PSAT, whether you take it sophomore year or junior year, is to provide a baseline score. So this is the starting point to say, all right, so where am I? Where can I end up? And the advice I give to my students when I'm working with them, so if they, we start working, say, around this time of year, or maybe a little bit later, prepping for a March SAT or a May SAT, is I want to know what their PSAT score is from sophomore year, or their PSAT score is, if we start a little bit later, from junior year. And it's the junior year one that I tend to look at more and say, all right, here's your baseline score. You got a 1200 on the SAT. Your goal is to get at least 100 points on that, right? So 100-point improvement from your PSAT score is a good goal. More than 100 points is really very, very possible, but that is in almost all cases going to take some work, right? So it won't be just that, like, I'm a little bit older and I've learned a little bit more math in school and my PSAT score just sort of floated up, or my SAT score improved 100 points from the PSAT. That usually takes work. But again, the point is that you can do the work and you can indeed get about 100 points on top of that. If you've taken a practice SAT as well, and it was done under time conditions and all of that, again, same sort of idea. I think from a baseline raw test that you did no practice for, improving 100 points is a reasonable expectation. All right, we'll talk a little bit later about some of the preparation you can do for the PSAT. More really for the SAT, because remember, keep in mind, the tests are basically identical, all right? You will hear that the PSAT is easier. I don't think that it's actually easier. I don't think that's that's an accurate description. It's not that the PSAT is just overall easier so much as there are fewer math questions, and so they have fewer hard questions to throw at you as a result, right? If there's a kind of balance of easy, medium, and hard questions with a preponderance of medium and hard. By cutting some questions out of the test, you get to see fewer tough questions. The PSAT might be a little bit easier, but that's mostly because there's fewer questions. Just taking a look at a question here. So the question is it better to take the SAT immediately after Algebra 2 instead of waiting until later? If a student took Algebra 1 and 2 as a sophomore or freshman, would it be better to take the SAT while it's still fresh instead of waiting? It's a good question. I mean, I think you want to be at least in Algebra 2. A lot of students don't take Algebra 2 until junior year of high school. My experience working with students is, and I think this is true for many of our students, is you want to have at least half a year of Algebra 2 under your belt. If you've completed all of Algebra 2 and you're a strong math student, then taking the test earlier could indeed make a whole heck of a lot of sense. Okay, let's move on a little bit more and talk about some of the other things that the PSAT can do for you. Here's the big thing that, from the perspective of colleges, what the PSAT, when you register for the PSAT, or not when you register, when you sit down to take the PSAT, and you may even do this a couple days in advance at school, you'll fill out a very long survey. It takes a good chunk of time, and it's going to ask you a ton of questions. It'll ask you, about your racial background, about family income, about what you're planning to do in college. It'll ask you about your grades and your grade point average, all of that. I actually do encourage you to fill out that information because it helps both colleges find you and also gives useful information for scholarship competition. It does mean that you're going to be barraged by lots of junk mail and lots of spam in your email over the next year. That can sometimes be useful because it will make you aware of some options as far as colleges go that you may not have been aware of. But the other big important point to make here is that not all the junk mail is junk mail because, again, you get to know about some colleges you may not know about. But really, here's the big thing, is that not all the spam is spam. So one of the things that students don't often think about when they're applying to college, and families don't think about when they're applying to college, is a phenomenon called demonstrated interest. So what does this mean? When you're applying to college, you think of, oh gosh, I'm applying to all these schools and I really hope I get into one of them. Well, that happens on the other side of this relationship as well. So when colleges get a ton of applications, they select the students that they think are going to be really good, and then they say, gosh, I really hope they decide to come here. At many, many, many schools, even some really selective schools, the deal will be that they'll accept something like 20,000 students to fill like 5,000 spots. So what they're really hoping to do is find students that are both good and be good for them, but also that they'll be good for you. And in the sense that you're going to be interested, if you get accepted, you're going to be interested and you're going to end up going there. And that's where demonstrated interest comes in. So this is just talking about ways that you can let a college know that you're interested in that school. And a very super basic way to do this is if you get an email from a college that you're interested in, open the email. It's as simple as that, right? So they're tracking all of this data. They're tracking how often you open an email from them. They're tracking whether or not you click on the link from that email and go over to the website and spend some time on the website. Do all of that. It's a way, if it's a school that you're interested in, it's a way to let them know that you are actually interested in going there, all right? So the PSAT is going to give you a baseline score. It's also going to introduce you to colleges. Question here is, do Ivies contact you? Not so much. Ivies, I mean, will sometimes, but the Ivy League schools don't have a very big problem with finding students who will go there if they get accepted. We covered this already, but one more time, your PSAT score is not going to be considered in the admissions process. Nobody is going to be looking at your PSAT score when it comes to accepting you to college. It won't even be in the file. It's not something they're even going to look at, so you don't have to worry about that at all. What it is used for, though, is PSAT score is used for scholarship competitions. And so we've got 6 scholarship competitions here. The National Merit Scholarship is the one that is the most well-known, the most famous. But I want to point out that there are these other scholarships as well, all right? Some of the scholarships are limited to low-income and or first-gen students. So first-generation students, meaning students who are the first in their family to go to college, right? These 2 scholarships can actually be quite lucrative, especially the second one. So the Asian and Pacific Islander Scholarship Fund is not just for 1 year, like say the National Merit is. It can be for multiple years, and it can range from a relatively small amount, like $2,500, up to $20,000. The Jack Kent Cooke Foundation sponsors actually the largest college scholarship. It's up to $40,000 a year, and it's good not only for college but also for grad school. So as long as you stay in school, they'll keep paying for it. $40,000 may not cover the entire cost of college, but it can cover a great big portion of it. And for most students who receive a Jack Kent Cooke scholarship, they're also getting other forms of financial aid, including a Pell Grant. And so it typically does pay not only just for college, but also for books and room and board and everything else. Okay. Those are 2 of the scholarships. We'll look at the other 3 here, and I'll return to the list so you can see the full list here in a second. Here we're just looking at who the scholarship's for and how much. So the National Merit Scholarship Competition, right? This is the most famous scholarship competition of all. The prize is worth $2,500. So not a great big sum of money. The Cobell Scholarship is a relatively new scholarship. It's for up to $10,000. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund goes up to $5,000. And the United Negro College Fund has both need-based, so meaning like it's based on your income, and merit-based is simply on scores grades. In all cases, and here just going back to the list, in every single one of these cases, the scholarship is not based just on the PSAT. So the PSAT is used to identify candidates for these scholarships, but then you have to do more work after that. There's often an application to fill out. Your grades are taken into consideration. Sometimes counselors need to write letters for these things. Basically, yeah, I mean, you're not done with just the PSAT. Somebody has asked, how competitive is it for all of these scholarships? Incredibly competitive is the simple answer. These are for very small numbers of people. It's very hard to get them. Let's go back and see if there's other questions here. And again, the way you're going to qualify for several of these scholarships, which you can see are based on ethnic and racial demographics, is that's where filling in the survey comes into play. So they'll ask you about about what demographic you belong to. Filling that out in the survey is the first step, and then again, high scores will get you the attention of these organizations. Let's see. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to the scholarship that everybody wants to talk about, the National Merit Scholarship. Okay. Somebody just asked if there's an exact day in October that I have to take the PSAT report to be eligible for the scholarship. The PSATs really only offer those 2 days, the Wednesday and the Saturday. You have to take it one of those 2 days. And if you do, and you indicate that you're interested in being considered, you'll be in consideration. Okay, so the National Merit Scholarship starts with your PSAT score, right? So this is actually the scholarship that most relies on the PSAT. And what they do is they take your PSAT score and they convert it into what they call the National Merit Scholarship Index. So they're going to take those test scores, all right? So again, those numbers that were between, what, 8 and, totally blanking on it, so 8 and 38. They're going to take those scores, they're going to add them all together, and then they're going to double it. So one thing to notice here is that for the PSAT, the reading test and the writing test actually account for 2/3 of the index, not just for half as they do with the SAT. So they take those numbers, add them together, and then double it. And then that number is called the index, the National Merit Scholarship Index, and that determines whether you're a semifinalist, whether you're commended, or neither, okay? I'm actually going to come back to this number in a second about those cutoff numbers. I just want to go to this. Let's take a look at the process, and then we'll get into more detail. So somewhere in the neighborhood of like 1.5 was actually 1.7 million juniors take the PSAT. And remember, only juniors are eligible for these scholarships. Out of that 1.5, 1.7 million, roughly 50,000 people are recognized with as commended scholars, all right? It's kind of like it's roughly speaking about like the top 5%, so if you're in the 95th percentile or higher, roughly speaking, we'll get there, it's actually a little bit higher than that. You'll be commended. What will that do for you? Not much of anything. It's not a bad thing to be commended by any means, but it's not going to make you more competitive getting into college or anything like that. Out of that group of commended scholars, there's going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of about 16,000 people recognized as semifinalists. Okay, semifinalists are then invited to do and that semifinalist qualification is based absolutely on your PSAT score. Just on your PSAT score is what qualifies you as a semifinalist. If you're a semifinalist, you're invited to go on and to essentially fill out the application to become a finalist. It's not a particularly hard application to fill out. They'll look at your grades and everything like that. But the one thing to add here is in order to become a finalist, you have to take the SAT to qualify, okay? The confirming score is what they call it. You take an SAT to get a confirming score. That number is not nearly as high as the National Merit Scholarship cutoff. And then out of that 15,000 finalists, about half of them actually are then awarded a scholarship. And that number is, again, $2,500. So you might be seeing now why we titled this, Why the PSAT Sort of Matters, right? So this is a tiny, tiny portion of the people taking the test who actually end up getting some money from the National Merit Scholarship Competition. And the amount of money you get, that $2,500, it may go up for this year, for the class of 2018, or sorry, it would be 2019. It may go up a little bit, but it won't go up significantly. So my advice to most people is to not really worry so much about the National Merit Scholarship Competition. Let's go back and take a look at some of these confirming numbers, okay? So let me just see where we are with questions. Somebody asked, what's the impact of winning a National Merit Scholarship? Depends. There are some schools, like the University of Oklahoma, if you're a finalist for the National Merit Scholarship, they'll give you a free, excuse me, they'll give you a free ride. Same with the University of Mississippi. If you're applying to Stanford as a National Merit Scholarship finalist, they don't care. They're almost all the National Merit Scholarship finalists are applying to Stanford. It's, again, not going to hurt you, but it's not going to do any. You won't be special by being a National Merit finalist. Applying in the Ivy League, applying to Stanford. They're going to see tons of people doing that. So let's take a look at these cutoff scores. So the cutoff scores for the class of 2018, so these are the people who took the PSAT last year. To be commended, you needed to score a 211. And then to be a semifinalist, these are the cutoffs for some states. I just kind of randomly picked different regions of the country. This is an important thing about the National Merit Scholarship Competition. It is based on what state you live in, or if you live in DC, it's determined by, you're competing against other residents of Washington, DC. If you're an American living abroad, you're judged against that pool of students. So you can see not all the numbers are the same. New Jersey, I put in the list because it had the highest number, which was 223. There were a bunch of states, that have 222. Alabama is one of the lowest states with 216. So where does that number come from, right? Or how hard is it to get the National Merit Scholarship? Very, very hard. So this is a 222. So let's say you live in California, or you live in Massachusetts, Connecticut, I think is a 222. This is what you would need to do. This is how you get to a 222. Again, we're adding up the 3 test scores and then we're doubling them. So here's 3 ways to get there. The first one, you get 1 perfect score and then you get a 37 and a 36, or you get 2 perfect scores, or you get 3 scores that are almost perfect. What does this mean? It means probably on the test you're missing across all the sections, across all 4 sections, you're probably missing fewer than, well, you're definitely missing fewer than 10 questions. You're probably missing something in the order of 5 or 6 questions in total. Okay? Again, very, very hard to get that National Merit Scholarship semifinalist status. Once you have semifinalist status, again, here's our numbers. Once you achieve semifinalist status, it's quite easy to become a finalist. But then to get some money out of it is not, not that easy either. So yeah, somebody asked again, how many questions wrong is a 37? Depends a little bit from test to test, but it's typically, it could be as few as 1 question wrong. In math, it might be as many as, say, 3 questions wrong in math. And then the same on verbal, we're probably talking, it could be as few as 1 question wrong. Definitely no more than 4 questions wrong. All right, let me just take again quick look and see if there's any other things. Okay, let's move on from there. the question came up again is, if it's that hard to get the National Merit Scholarship, why aren't colleges impressed? To correct that, it's not that colleges aren't impressed. It depends on the college you're talking about, right? So some schools will give you a full ride, possibly covering room and board, covering your books and everything like that, if you're a National Merit finalist. If you're applying to an uber selective school, though, if you think about this, if there's 16,000 semifinalists, well, guess how many of them are applying to Stanford? Guess how many of them are applying to the University of Chicago? A lot of them. So being a National Merit finalist doesn't guarantee anything at those schools. It's an okay thing to have, but again, it's not that it's not going to be all that impressive at a super selective school. What do I mean by super selective school? The question just came up. A place with less than 20% admit rates, and your kind of uber selectives less than 15%. So those are places like Chicago, the Ivies, most of the Ivies, somewhere like Duke as well, the UC schools. Let's see. All right. Oh, all right. So somebody did just ask again. Yeah, to recover this. So you take the SAT to qualify as a finalist, and the confirming score is not as high as the National Merit Scholarship cutoff. The confirming score is the SAT confirming score, right? So to become a finalist, you have to also take the SAT. And so that number, if you can see the PSAT we just saw, the numbers have to be incredibly high. So essentially close to perfect. That's not true with the SAT. It still has to be good, but it's not like you have to get 800s or 750s even to get a confirming score in the SAT. All right. So some advice now about how you can raise your PSAT score. Let's go back to the point that the PSAT doesn't matter all that much, so you shouldn't be focused a ton on the PSAT. You should be thinking really more about your SAT. And the key is to get a higher score on the SAT, you have to become very familiar with the test. And we'll talk a little bit later about some of our course options and how you can raise your score significantly. But here's some quick pieces of advice before you take the PSAT. Pacing is an undervalued part of any test strategy. So what do I mean by pacing? Standardized tests are always timed, and they're timed in part because they want to make it so not everybody can finish the test, because that is a way to sort students into higher and lower performing groups. Lots of students make the mistake of thinking that they need to finish all the questions, right? So they work a bit like rabbits, right? There are 58 questions on the test. I'm going to rip through all 58. I'm going to speed through them. But because I'm racing so fast through the questions, I miss, a good chunk of them, right? So I'm making a lot of dumb errors along the way. So one way you can actually improve your score is, for many students, especially true on math, but it also works quite well in reading, is to slow down, right? So to be more of the tortoise, taking your time to make sure you get the questions that you know how to do. So our turtle here is only going to try 38 questions. And let's say, all right, the turtle gets 30 questions right out of the bunch and then just simply randomly guesses on the rest. Well, 20 guesses, there's 4 answer choices. You figure you're going to get something in the neighborhood of 4 or 5 questions right there. And so we're now up to 610, right? So tried many fewer questions than the rabbit and ended up with the score 70 points higher as a result. So one thing to think about here is not that I've got to race through and get every single question, but let me slow down a little bit, maybe not get to the last passage on reading, maybe skip some math questions at the end in order to raise my score. Next point, the way you do questions in school is not always the best way to do questions, right? So this is modeled off of a question that was on the very first PSAT that was offered. It was the hardest question on the test. Fewer than 20% of the people who took this test got this question right. It's an algebra question, right? So this is something you might have done in freshman or sophomore year in your algebra class. If x and y are integers larger than 0, such that 4y equals 2x, what's the value of x plus y divided by y? And your algebra teacher would have you do a bunch of steps like this, solving for x and same with y. Let me give you a second to go ahead and give it a shot on your own. So again, one way we could do this is set y to equal 2 divided by 4 times x and substitute x over 2 for y wherever we see y, and then solve for the numerator, multiply by the reciprocal, and get the answer. Or we could say, I don't really want to do it like we do it in math class. Instead, I'm going to say, oh, well, there's x's and y's in here. They're all a bunch of variables. Let me plug in some numbers for x and y, and let me plug in some numbers that are really easy, like 4 and 2, right? So 2 times 4 is 8, 4 times 2 is 8, so our equation looks good. And then I just simply do 4 plus 2, which is 6, divided by 2. And everybody on this webinar now knows the answer to this question. It's 3, all right? So the way you do questions in school is not necessarily the best way to do questions on the SAT or the PSAT. And that's a lot of what we do at Princeton Review. It's kind of what made us famous, is figuring out smarter ways to do questions, ways that are efficient, ways that are easy. And again, this is a question that when it was given on the PSAT ranked as a very difficult question. Doing it this way, it's a question when, and I've seen this happen, it's a question a 4th grader can do. Let's take a little quick peek at the grammar section. All right, so this is the format of the grammar. So this is section 2, the writing section. You'll have a passage off to the left and questions off to the right. Here's the advice on this. If you start reading the passage, when you get to number 1, you finish reading the sentence and then go do that question, right? You don't read the whole thing first. The questions tend to be more about mechanics and grammar, not about the overall argument or meaning of the passage. So in this one, we've got, give everybody a moment to just read through that first paragraph. We're going to just do the first question because I want to make sure we have time to get to questions at the end. All right, so we get to the question or to the sentence. When any one of these changes occur, it is likely the result of careful analysis conducted by transportation planners. The key on reading and writing is process of elimination. So it's not finding the right answer, it's getting rid of the wrong answers, all right? So that's one point to make, and we'll be doing process of elimination here in a second. The second point to make is you want to look for patterns in the questions. You want to look for frequently tested items. So if you look at this one, number 1, what we can see is that we've got 2 things that should jump out at you. One is there's a verb that's underlined. There's actually 2, but I'm focusing more on the occur. And there's a pronoun. There's the word it in there. So I want to be focused on that as well. I'm going to start with the verb, right? And say, all right, so when any one of these changes occur. If I'm looking at a verb, I'm always looking at what the subject is of the verb, okay? So when any one of these changes occur, well, would we say one occur or one occurs? We're going to go with occurs, right? So we can get rid of A and B, right? You wouldn't say one occur, you'd say one occurs to me. And now we're looking at the it versus the they. Well, when any one, so if it's one, I'm going for something singular, and I want to get rid of they, and my answer is going to be D. So when any one of these occurs, it is likely the result of careful analysis conducted by transportation planners, all right? What you can see on the screen here is what you should see in your test booklet as well, where you're finding the problems with the answer choices and crossing them out. Question came up is, what should we do when we're stuck on a question? Skip it, move on, go finish if it's reading or writing, finish the passage, and then come back and do that question. If it's a math question, go finish the whole section and come back to it and try it again. There's a quick question about level of difficulty on this. This, I don't actually know the level of difficulty on it. This one isn't modeled quite so closely on a real PSAT. I mean, what I know from having looked at a lot of PSAT tests and working with a lot of students is that subject-verb agreement is a common problem for people, or is a kind of question students struggle with a lot. Move through the rest quickly. For those of you working ahead, here's some answers. So number 2, we're looking for designing, because that's a list of evaluating, assessing, improving, and designing. And then on number 3, this is one of my favorite errors. It's a redundancy error. Its analysis of the traffic count indicates that there's more traffic on the current road as it is designed at this time. You don't have to say current and at this time, right? You can just say current. You don't need to repeat that, okay? Let's move on to a couple what I call test prep tricks. So with an X at the end, because these are kind of like cheap little tricks that you can use. You're not going to become a national merit finalist because you've mastered these test prep tricks, but you may pick up a couple extra points, 10, 20 points on here. So the first one is don't leave anything blank, right? We talked about this already. There's no penalty for wrong answers on the PSAT, so you don't leave anything blank. But aren't there some questions, you might say, that are grid-ins, ones that aren't multiple choice? How on earth can I, guess on those? Don't leave those blank either. Use your birth month, right? This is, again, a trick. The basis for this is that we've looked at the answers that show up on the grid-ins, on the ones where you write in your own answer, and the answers that are most common are the numbers 2 through 12, right? So the single-digit numbers, and then 10, 11, 12. So here we're just being a little bit superstitious and saying like, well, I was born in June, so if I don't know how to do a question on a grid-in, I'm going to pick 6, because that's my birth month. Next test prep trick. Catastrophe and catastrophic. These 2 words have shown up on exactly half of the released SATs. They've shown up on 5 out of the 10 released SATs. They've been wrong every single time they've appeared in the answer choices. So if you see catastrophe or catastrophic, it's a pretty good guess that it's going to be wrong. And then on the grammar, colons are right? Students don't want to pick colons because nobody in high school or in college or in most of the world uses colons in their writing, but they are right, and they're right. This is something I've counted again across 10 SATs and 4 PSATs. They're right about 1/3 of the time. So don't just simply eliminate an answer choice because it's got a colon in it. Moving on quickly to the end, because I do want to make sure that we have some time. Let me just emphasize this point quickly, that getting into college isn't just about your test scores, right? So this is a list from a survey that an organization does called NACAC every year, college admissions offices. What do they care the most about? They care the most about grades in college prep courses, right? So your math, science, English, history classes, not gym, not studio art, and that's your strength of curriculum, is that you're taking the hardest classes that are available to you, and then your admission test scores are your 3rd consideration, right? Princeton Review is here to help you with all of those aspects. We do have on-demand online tutoring to help you with coursework. We do have test prep classes that can be self-paced classes that you just simply follow on your own. You can work with an online tutor, you can work with an in-person tutor, you can take an online class, you can take an in-person class, and we also have admissions advice as well. We also have admissions counselors who help you get your application into the best shape possible. Excuse me, sorry about that. The right coach makes all the difference when it comes both to an application and to the test as well. So you want to make sure that you're working with somebody who knows the test really, really well, and somebody who knows the admissions process really, really well. We do have test prep options for every schedule and for every budget, from self-paced classes all the way up to one-on-one tutoring that is done in your own home. So at this point, I wanted to quickly turn it over to Ann. I know she's got a quick survey for you guys to do. In the meantime, you can also enter any more questions you have. We've got about 5 minutes left here. If you If I don't have time to tackle your question, I will reach out to you if you give us your contact information and send you an email in the next day or two with any questions you might have. And I can turn it back over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, James. Yeah, so right before I do that poll for you guys, I just wanted to give your attention over to this limited time offer that we are promoting right now. So for those of you that are interested in getting some sort of PSAT prep before the October 11th exam next month, if you were to enroll in any of our SAT programs, so as James mentioned, we have private tutoring, we have classroom courses, we have online courses, we also have self-paced programs. Any one of those SAT programs does actually come with PSAT prep. And as long as you enroll in that program before or by 10/5, you will get free access to that prep for the PSAT. So it actually was just going to come along with your SAT program. So that's a great little promo just to keep you guys informed about. And then lastly, we are running just for you webinar attendees, we are doing a $250 off our SAT or ACT Ultimate programs. The SAT one that I'm mentioning here does come with the PSAT prep. So if you are interested and would like to take advantage of that $250 off, you can just enroll using the promo code PSAT250 at checkout, or give that to the phone rep if you decide to call in for your enrollment. And that is good through this Friday, which is September 29th. And so right before we head it back over to James for last few questions, I just want to ask if you were interested in receiving a free college admissions consultation with one of our college admissions experts. Please go ahead and just click on yes. If you are not, that is totally fine. If you're not ready or you're not quite sure yet what you might need, by all means, you can just click on that no thank you comment. But we're here to help. And so really, we just want to make sure that you have all of the right answers to all of your college and test prep questions. So I'm just going to give you guys another few moments just to submit your answers. And then James, if you want to go ahead and just sort of see what kind of questions you can answer in the next couple of minutes before we end our session this evening, that'd be great.
Cool. All right, I'm going to kind of lightning around this. So first question is, will administrators give test takers a 10-minute warning before ending the test? They should give you a 5-minute warning before the end of each section. Unfortunately, you can't always count on them giving you that 5-minute warning, but I would say most of the time they do. Not a bad idea if you don't own a watch to get a watch for the test. You can't use a timer, you can't have your phone out, obviously, but to have a watch on so you can keep some track of the time is a good idea. My contact information is up on screen. That's my email address. Feel free to email me with any questions that I don't get to this evening as well. You can contact me directly. You will be able to hear this webinar again. As Anna mentioned at the beginning, we'll be sending out a link so you can watch it again. How much should you study for the PSAT? Well, that all depends. I generally say you don't need to make a big push for the PSAT because it's useful to get that baseline number, that kind of starting point number, and for it to be sort of raw, unless you think you are a legitimate and serious candidate for the National Merit Scholarship, and then it may be wise to put some investment in. I would say at this point, though, 2 weeks out or so, well, I guess not 2 weeks, about 3 weeks out from the PSAT, it's hard to make large improvements in just 3 weeks' time. Typically, it's going to take somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 20 weeks for people to see a big improvement on their SAT score. Let's see. Some of the best tools to practice for grammar, honestly, it's doing practice questions. So a simple way to do this, there are free downloadable PSAT exams on the College Board website. We are also hosting PSAT tests in many of our sites here in the US this weekend. You go to our website, you can find a way to sign up for a free practice test there. Let's see. Somebody asked about, is the makeup test harder? Nope. Calculators are pretty, somebody asked about calculator type. You can use pretty much any calculator you want on the SAT or PSAT. see if we can hit maybe one more. What's the most I can do to prep until October 11th? Good question. I think if you're going to do anything at all, the very first thing you should do to prep is take a practice PSAT, just to see where you are. Review the questions you got wrong. And then, again, we've got PSAT prep options. They're self-paced, so you're working through the material on your own. If you sign up for one of our SAT classes, it's just free and included in it as well. Or one of our books, like the Cracking the SAT book, is also, again, perfectly good to use for the PSAT because the tests are basically the same. So I think I should wrap it up at this point. I do want to wish you all good luck with the PSAT, but I also want to remind you again that it only sort of matters. So this is not something you should be super stressed out about. If you're a parent, you shouldn't be super stressed out about it either. This really is just kind of a practice run at the test, nothing to get really worked up about. And best of luck, and thanks so much for joining us for this webinar.
Great. Thank you so much, James. As I mentioned earlier, this session will be emailed out to everyone who attended in about 24 to 48 hours after we've completed tonight's webinar. And so we thank you so much for attending. We hope we were able to answer all of your questions. And certainly we will be reaching out to those of you who requested the consultation, and as well as any of you who have submitted questions that we were not able to get answers to tonight. So thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your evening.